The Call of Duty community is in an uproar, and here is why. Recently, Activision Blizzard announced that 2,000 people were going to be laid off by the end of January 2024. And on top of that, this tweet right here actually details the exact percentage that each of the game studios and the game developers who actually make the games we play were getting laid off. And that's a very worrisome picture. And this all comes a couple months after Microsoft officially acquired Activision Blizzard. So a lot of fans are worried about what's going to happen to Call of Duty. You have someone who's new in charge of the Call of Duty series, you have a bunch of people getting fired, and a lot of these game studios are losing their development team. So what is happening to Call of Duty? Well, if you got that information just now, just like I did originally, well, you probably made the wrong assumption, as a lot of people did. A lot of people didn't look for the information and for the facts, which is what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you the secret story behind what actually is happening at the layoffs. You probably assumed that these 2,000 people getting laid off are the game developers, the people responsible for making the games that we play. And unfortunately, that is not the correct information. When you break down the percentages shown here, and you actually calculate how many employees got laid off from these game studios and are directly responsible for game development, it comes out to be less than the 2,000 number we saw. As a matter of fact, it's less than 1,000 people who are directly responsible for game development who got laid off. And I'm going to start showing you the math here, and it's going to change the way that you're viewing all of this information. Because now that I've told you that, you're wondering, well, who are these other 1,000 people that got laid off? Well, roughly 100 of these people were the Battle.net support and back-end interface team for Battle.net. Battle.net, for those of y'all who don't know, is the PC launcher for all the Activision Blizzard games on PC. However, since Microsoft has now acquired the company, why do you need your own individual launcher? You have the Steam store page, and you have the Microsoft Store on PC where you can get these games. You don't need an individual launcher anymore. On top of that, Call of Duty also got rid of 250 employees that were redundant positions. And what I mean by redundant is if you're Microsoft and you're walking in with a huge staff of people already working for you, and you're buying another game studio, well, a lot of these positions don't need to exist if you have two of them. Why do you need two CEOs? Why do you need two heads of planning for the future? Why do you need two HR departments? And the HR department is a perfect example. You don't need two HR departments. You already have one, and you can just expand the staff there. Why do you need to double your size of your HR departments? So 200 of the people who got laid off are directly from the HR departments. 50 people who got laid off were redundant positions that you already had, so why would you need two of them? And now we come to one of the biggest chunks of the layoffs, which is actually roughly 700 to 800 people. The physical media and shipping logistics department for Activision Blizzard. First off, Target, Walmart, and Best Buy have announced plans to stop selling all physical media in 2024 and early 2025. This means CDs, DVDs, records, and all that stuff right there is not going to be sold in stores anymore. So what's the point of even making it if you're not going to be able to sell them? Microsoft has already stopped making physical media as they're trying to push everyone towards the Game Pass and have everything be electronically online through cloud-based gaming. So they've already pulled back on physical media production, and physical media production itself is a costly endeavor. It is not worth the cost to do. Why would you sell a game on a physical DVD when you're going to lose half the profit you would have made if you had sold it online already? If it was a cloud-based service or an online game you can download over Wi-Fi, you get the full $60. If you sell it in a retail game studio like GameStop or Walmart or Target, you automatically lose about 50% of the cost just in shipping and when the seller actually takes their cut. So why would you have a physical copy of the game, especially when it doesn't make money and there are still 1 million copies of Call of Duty Vanguard that are sitting in store stocks at different locations across different retailers? That is a lost product. That is a product that you made and it costs you $30 to make that you can't sell. It is not worth it to sell physical media. And the shipping and logistics for this is not something you have to handle anymore if you're not selling physical media. But when you add those numbers up, the 100 employees from Battle.net, the 250 people who are redundant positions, and the 700 to 800 people that were in your supply chain and distribution centers, as well as physical media department, it comes out to be roughly 1,000 to 1,050 people. Everyone had a huge overreaction thinking that all of these game developers got fired. But in reality, a lot of game developers did get fired, because if you've done the math here, that comes out to be roughly 850 to 900 game developers who got let go in the layoffs. But this is not actually the first time that Activision Blizzard has laid off a huge amount of employees out of the blue. As a matter of fact, this layoffs we've seen right here was the culmination of over 3 years of layoffs being built up. The 900 people who got laid off make up 8% of the total 13,000 people at Activision Blizzard. Now you go back and you look, in the last 3 years, no one got laid off at Activision Blizzard. 50 people got fired for reasons of termination, meaning that they violated HR or company policy. Now you go back and look at 2021. In 2021, Activision Blizzard laid off 400 people, which at the time was roughly 3% of their company. Now you go back to the end of 2018, beginning of 2019. Activision Blizzard laid off 800 people at the end of 2018 and beginning of 2019, which at the time they had 10,000 people total, estimating them out to be roughly 8% of the company. Now you go back to the early 2010s. Roughly a third to half of the Blizzard development team got laid off because World of Warcraft was not selling as well as they wanted it to. Activision Blizzard has a history of massive layoffs at the end of the year, beginning of the next year, and they usually do it every 2 years. But between 2022 and 2023, they didn't do any layoffs. As it was announced in March of 2022, Microsoft had officially put in a bid to buy Activision Blizzard. This means that they were looking at the company for months before they actually put in the bid. And Activision Blizzard wanted to make the most money off the sale because if you're the CEO or you hold stock in the company, you're going to make a massive payout when the company is bought out. So what do you do to drive up the cost of the company? Well, you don't get rid of your employees. All of your employees hold a valuation to the company that's worth a high amount of dollars. So if you want to keep that value as high as possible, you don't lay anyone off. Especially when you're trying to make it seem like you're a really productive game studio, why would you get rid of anyone at all? So Activision Blizzard for almost 2.5 years didn't lay anybody off because they were trying to drive the value of the company up before the sale to Microsoft. And if you take that number of 900 people who got fired from the development team, and even if you round it up to 1,000, that is a lot of people who are directly responsible for making video games in the Call of Duty series. However, this is not any larger layoff than what we saw in 2018 and 2019. At the time, that was a huge shocking story, and Call of Duty is still around today. People are overreacting to this, and this is the information that you never got told. 1,000 of those people who got laid off were redundant positions or positions that did not need to exist anymore. You don't need physical media, you don't need 2 HR divisions, you don't need 2 positions of the same title. You don't need your own separate launcher if you're going to sell everything through Steam or through your Microsoft Xbox store on PC. And it's sad to say because these are real people, but they were just costing the company money. There was no actual value to these things that they were doing, especially with all the recent things that are being changed by Microsoft. They were becoming redundant or unnecessary positions altogether. And I feel terrible saying that people are unnecessary or redundant. To say that anybody is unnecessary or redundant is one of the worst things you could say to somebody. If you've been watching this video and you've been thinking to yourself, good, it's gonna kick all these other developers in the butt and get their gears going and we're gonna have a better Call of Duty game, that's not the way to look at this. 2,000 people now have to go find a new job and still support their family and pay their bills. They are still human beings, and just because you don't like their product does not mean that they're any less of a human being. However, everyone overreacted to these layoffs and didn't look at the information and the facts as I just showed you. The information and facts I just showed you paint a completely different picture than what you originally assumed at the beginning of this video. And I know you assumed it because I did the same thing. And so I recommend you subscribe because I give you the information as it is actually told. I try not to get upset or be emotional about this information when it comes out. Instead, I do the research and tell you the truth of what is actually going on with Call of Duty. And if you want to know what the next 10 years of Call of Duty games are, this is the video that you want to watch right here.